I'd like to call this meeting of the Lehigh County Authority to order. This meeting is being recorded and streaming live. If there's anybody who has any public participation or wants to make any public comments, please sign in if you haven't signed in. We have a roll call of the directors present.
Certainly. Roll call of the board: Brian Noggle, Scott Bieber,
Present.
Dick Bonner,
Here.
Norma Cusick,
Here.
Ken Lyons, Kevin Baker.
Is signing in right now.
Kevin Baker will be here momentarily. Linda Rosenfeld. Here. Jeff Morgan.
Here.
Amir Famili.
Here.
Kevin Baker.
Yeah.
All right, Kevin Baker is here. We have 7 board members present, so we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Lethal. Next item is review of the agenda. Is there any changes to be made to the agenda, and are there going to be any executive sessions?
All right, so for today, I have no changes planned for the agenda or suggested. However, I will request an executive session following the close of the regular meeting for personnel matter.
Okay, thank you, Lethal. Approval of minutes. Mr. Bonner,
Make a motion to accept the minutes as published for the October 24th meeting.
the motion, a second,
Second.
and a second by Linda. To approve the minutes, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I have it.
I was not here for the last meeting, so I'm saying.
Okay, so, okay, you're stating that. Public comments. Does anybody have any public comments on any items that are not covered by this agenda?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next item. Finance and administration. We have a wastewater rate schedule to be approved. We've already reviewed those. Lethal?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So the board packet, this includes the blue sheet, if you have a paper copy, and it's pages 8 through 30 in the electronic document if you have it, or if you're following along online. You see in the packet, there's a cover memo from me that explains all the different rates that are changing in the process that we've gone through. And then the schedule of water rates and charges and the schedule of wastewater rates and charges are attached, showing the changes in a highlight. So you can see the change from the 22 rate to the 2023 rate. I think we've covered pretty much everything in the prior discussions with the board regarding the budget. We provided a presentation with Dave Bush from Keystone Alliance Consulting on the suburban water rate study as well. That study did cover the suburban water charges as well as public fire protection that was included in that study. Jennifer Montero, our contracts administrator, presented the Western Lehigh user charge report that covers various rates that are shown in the memo. And then the Allentown water and sewer rates we covered at a couple different meetings as following the terms of the lease agreement. So there's really no changes that we haven't talked about. The only change that I think we haven't talked about, I wanted to highlight, is in the wastewater rate schedule. On page 8, there's a section called line inspection and cleaning services. These are rates that were put in the schedule in 2009, which is quite some time ago. And we generally don't follow these rates. If we're doing any services like this for a community, we'll just charge for the number of people and the hours and equipment that we actually use. So, so this schedule we're recommending removing from the rate schedule completely, and we'll continue practice. If we do this kind of work for a community, that we would charge the actual cost for providing that service. So that's the only new change to the rate schedule. So
Sorry, go ahead.
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, if there's, okay, thank you for that synopsis. Are there any questions from the board on this proposal to, adopt these new rates? If not, do we have a motion to adopt these new rates?
So
Richard has seconded the motion. Any discussion on this motion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Ayes carry, rates are adopted. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On to wastewater. Okay, we got a couple of reports here. It's Pines Island wastewater treatment plant. We're looking at this pilot study for this brand new technology that might be helpful for us.
Yeah, so for this one, again, this is in the board packet, they're the TAN documents. And if you're following along electronically, pages 31 through 58. And for that, we do have a presentation that Phil DePoe will give, and he has a special guest here from AECom he can introduce at the appropriate time.
Sure.
Do you want me to go ahead and put it up on the screen for you?
Sure. Yeah.
Go ahead, Phil.
All right, thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone. Like Lisa mentioned, I do have Chris Curran here with AECom. Chris, you were here what, I think June, the end of June. So we'll get to Chris's piece in a little bit. So before I get to the pilot discussion, I think it's prudent to talk about the existing peak wet weather at Klein's Island and some plans to address the issues now. And then we'll talk about the next further down the road about this pilot proposal. So again, we want to look at the existing capabilities of Klein's Island as it relates to peak wet weather. I want to touch upon our proposed phase 1 and phase 2 approaches to address wet weather. And then the pilot proposal, which we'll be requesting authorization for, that's actually going to be our phase 3. So you'll see how this all ties together shortly. Just some background of what we've been doing over the past couple of years. So again, the peak wet weather piece at Klein's Island is not a new topic. It's been discussed for over 10 years. And now, again, it's being discussed because of the 537 that we're under. And again, the two main goals of 537 is to stop using outfall 003, which we'll get into next, and then eliminate SSOs in the system. So back to the peak wet weather. Kleinfelder is the main driver behind the engineering with peak wet weather improvements. And they've had a couple of studies since 2020. The AECom was involved with some bench scale testing for the high rate treatment that we're going to talk about later. And of course, Arcadis has been helping us with the conveyance system. So there's a lot of moving parts here. Things have started to come together quickly in this past 2 months. So I think it's appropriate that we talk about what we are planning to do with phase 1 and 2 first. So again, this may be a little hard to see. Lisa, if you could point your mouse to the small circle. That small circle is the outfall 003 structure itself. And then the bigger red circle is where the discharge occurs. So 003 is used when the plant experiences more than 87 million gallons a day. It doesn't happen a lot, but it happens more than zero. Like Lisa pointed that, that's a good way to say it. It happens more than zero. So we have to reduce the number of times 003 is used. And the tricky part is that the conveyance system is also limited to what can actually get to Klein's Island. We're saying 105 is the number that can actually get there, and everything else it backs up upstream. So there's two different numbers in play here, but the biggest number we're going to talk about today is that 87 number and what to do about that number. This is hard to see. Again, the point of this is that if you count up all the lines that are not yellow, the yellow lines are no bypasses for that year. If you count all the other lines up, it's about 33 times. 003 has been used since 2003. So it comes in waves, with the changes in the weather patterns. Again, DEP does not like 003, and we have to raise the capability of the plant to handle more peak flow. So we want to split this up into two phases. The first phase, we want to go from 87 to 100. And then the second phase, we want to go to 100 to 120. I'll talk about the timing and what both those look like shortly. And again, the phase 3 is the authorization that we're going to be talking about in a couple minutes. Phase 1 is a lot of this is actually master plan driven. So the master plan identified there's 2 main pump stations at the plant. Both these pump stations need quite a bit of work electrically and from a pumping standpoint. So once we make changes to both of those pump stations, and we're gonna increase the pumping capacity to 100 at both stations. And then, of course, there's a lot of electrical involved with that. And then the third piece to get to 100, there's some piping some interconnect piping that needs to occur to split the flow. So in a nutshell, all it is increasing the pumping, electrical work, and some yard piping work. And that's phase 1. And then this is just a graphical. You can see where the main areas of the work is going to be occurring. The left circle is the main pump station, auxiliary pump station. So that needs upgraded. The bottom circle is the primary effluent pump station that needs upgraded to 100. And then the piping is going to occur in that third circle. So phase 1 did not talk about anything outside of the plant. Phase 2, we're going to start talking about items outside the plant as well. So phase 2, again, we'll have 100 in place. In order to get to phase 2, if you remember, the conveyance system is what's the right word? It's too small. It's restricted. So once we start opening up the conveyance system, that means Client's Island's got to start handling more peak flow. So that's what's going to happen with phase 2. The park pump station, which is the LCA park pump station, that force main stops about 1,000 feet short of the plant. So we want to extend that force main to the plant. And then there's additional work on top of that extension to get to the 120. It'll be on the next slide. What's important to know here is that this extension has been talked about for decades. It's never come to materialize. But now it's starting to become a solid plan that this phase 2. We'll talk about the timing soon. What's important to note here is that in order to get 120, you'll see soon, we have to do some changing to the way the flow trickles down through the plant. Right now, it's always in series, so we have to do some parallel operation to split the flow inside the plant. And we'll talk about that soon. So again, here's the existing schematic for the liquid side. Everything's in sequence. You're starting at the top left there and going to the bottom right. And then you'll see soon where some changes are going to occur to get to 120. I don't want to get into the details too much here, but the items in, I guess that's like a pinkish color. Those are the new items that need to occur to get to 100 and then to get to 120 as well. So bottom line, in order to get to 120, we need a couple more primary tanks, another grit chamber, another screen. And then again, the 100 improvements are the items in the middle, new pumps. So the biggest trick here is the piping changes that will allow us to flip to parallel mode. And I'll get into what DEP has said about that shortly. But that's what has to occur. So in 120, 20 will be treated by the rocks. This is a very high level. 20 will be treated by the rocks. 100 will be treating by the 4 trickling filters that we have. And then after that, the flow gets split to the different settling tanks. So that's why we say parallel mode. Only some of the flow is going to be treated by the rocks. The other flow will be treated by the towers. So again, this is what I just mentioned already. The extension, new grid chamber, new screen, 2 new primary tanks. And then some valving and piping. And then we have to increase the effluent pumping system to 120 as well. Again, we'll talk about this shortly, but we've talked to DEP about this 3 times already. We've talked to DRBC about this 1 time, and no major concerns on both parties to get to 120, which is a good sign. The bottom left there is where the Park Pump Station force main extension is likely to land once we extend it. That's where the grid chamber will go. That's where the screen will go. Bottom right there is where the 2 new tanks will go. And then the top circle again is where the more piping changes need to occur. So you can see it's it's not the whole plant. It's concentrated areas for both phases.
Bill, you don't see any risk of preventing us for phase 1 and 2 to get us to 120? I mean, this is a theoretical model, right? I mean, it's a modeling that we have done. So if you go through key things that has to happen to allow us to get to 120, what are one or two things that keep you up at night that might prevent us from getting us to that 120?
Probably the bottom right-hand corner. At least if you go to the left a little bit, where the word new is, that's substation 2 right there, Amir. We replaced that before COVID. In that area, it has, it's all fill. Brian, you correct me if I'm wrong, it's all fill back there. We ran into problems with construction during sub 2 with the fill back there. So that would be my biggest concern, construction wise. Is that area right where the primary tanks are gonna go.
What kind of fill are we talking about? Big slabs of concrete and stuff, or?
It was during the substation 2 job, it was this black. I don't know what they never identified what it was, right? It was some sort of black material. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know what it was, but so we had to deal with that during the construction of sub 2. So we're gonna have to deal with that during the construction of those tanks. And then, of course, the force main extension it's not gonna be easy to do that. But it needs to be done.
No, I had a question. Is this, when we go to this peak flow, we're gonna put a lot of extra effort onto the trickling filters, is that?
The plastic, yeah, the four circular towers there, right above, right there.
Well, I'm reading that normally we do. I mean, we do sequential operations under normal conditions, and then we're gonna go to, where do you see it there? They're running parallel. In other words, all 4 of you going.
Yeah, and client fellow Tim Bradley has looked at this in detail, and he's comfortable with this approach. Chris, you want to add anything more about this?
Yeah, with trickling filter, typical operation, there's a heavy component of recirculation that's ongoing. So during the higher flow events, you can reduce that recirculation. So you're still seeing similar hydraulic loading on the trickling filters, but that's what Tim's been studying and we've reviewed, the concept of the parallel arrangement.
And we have to remember too, this only occurs on average 2 times a year.
Yeah.
So, it's just.
But you be able to handle that extra burden.
Exactly. It's just the infrequent amount of this will have to be utilized. We're comfortable with this approach. So I mentioned that we met with DEP 3 times already. We actually just had a phone call with them about an hour ago. And they are still comfortable with this approach to get to 100. And the one going from 100 to 120 may have to go into the final 537 plan. So we're talking about the timing soon here. But again, we met them in June, August, November. They're well aware of what we want to do here. No major concerns by DEP. DRBC, same thing. We have to always make sure we avoid the substantial alteration piece when we talk about Klein's Island. No major concerns by DRBC. They will want a new docket. So we'll have to, take care of the paperwork. And Chuck, I believe you're you've already started to receive some preliminary design documents from the client for phase one.
Yeah, in a couple months, I'll be taking to the board a request for design phase approval for 3 100 MGD projects. What Phil had said, one of them is the main and auxiliary pump station upgrade. The second one is the intermediate pump station upgrade, what Phil mentioned about the primary effluent pumps that pump the effluent from the primary clarifiers to the top of the plastic media trickling filters. And the third one is what we call the tertiary bypass. That's that 50 MGD bypass. So you can go directly from the plastic media trickling filter, the effluent from that to the final clarifiers without going in series to the rock media trickling filters. So those 3 projects, I anticipate requesting design phase approval in late January or February.
So just a question, so that or just a comment, those are not simple projects. We're talking about very large pumps and very large diameter piping that has to be replaced and keeping the plant in operation,
Yes.
right? So it's not just a back of the napkin type design.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we're looking at options for the main pump station.
Right.
Whether we should build a separate main pump station while keeping the existing station in operation, or like a sequential upgrade of each pump as we go.
Right.
So it's pretty complicated. Yeah.
So more details to follow, like Chuck said, but we do wanna, the plan is to submit permits to DEP this time next year. And, there's gonna be a long lead time for the equipment. We wanna be done this phase one by 2026. That will line up nicely with the 537 plan submission. So again, we wanna include phase two in the final 537. And so the intent is to be done by phase two this decade. So, we'll be able to handle 120 this decade.
So I just have a question. This is probably an oversimplification, but why, if you do this, why doesn't it take care of all the hydraulic load problems for the plant? I mean, you're taking care of all the peak flow. Why doesn't that address the whole problem? What is the?
If we get to 120 with this,
Right,
I mean, we haven't opened up the conveyance system yet.
right.
And that's what we're talking about next. When you start opening up the conveyance system, more flow is going to get to Klein's Island.
Oh, I see.
So it has to be, everything has to be sequenced exactly right. And that's a tricky part with the phase three is the timing. So that's a high level overview of phase one, phase two. This may sound like deja vu from a couple years ago when we had the same concept to get to 120. We're going about it a different way now. And the big thing is DEP is on board. So any questions about phase one, phase two before we get into the trickier phase three?
Yeah, what do you mean what's the major change from previous plan?
Previous plan was the blending concept,
Oh,
which
okay,
bypassed the rocks, bypassed the filters.
right, okay, yeah.
So DEP wants to see, they want to see that treatment occur, which will occur, with these proposals.
What about construction and materials and all that kind of stuff? Has that been taken into account on a time frame? Because people are having so much trouble getting that kind of equipment.
Yeah, I know Chuck's gonna talk about substation in a little bit here.
Yeah.
All these equipments are like a year out at least.
Yeah, I think there's enough time built into your schedule to finish the projects by the end of 2026.
The phase one.
If we get design completed next year, we're ready to go out on the street with bidding toward the end of next year or early 2024. That would give us, a good 18 months to construct the project. And hopefully, you raise a valid point because we have that problem with every project now with the delivery of equipment.
When we go, come back to the board for additional approvals for those projects, we can kind of dive into a little bit more the detail of constructability and schedules and costs. We were not presenting any of that here today either.
With no questions, I will move on to phase 3, which is the authorization request. So again, phase 3 is the trickiest of all of them because it's so far, not so far out, but there's a lot tied to phase 3. And it all comes down to, Mike, what you had asked. Why can't 120 just address it? 120 can't just address it because we won't have touched the conveyance system yet. You know, we'll have the park pump station enforcement extension, but there's a lot more that has to occur besides that extension. And it's a matter of when does that occur and what occurs is still being looked at. But, you know, assume we have the enforcement extension in place, assume we have, 120 by the end of this decade. What's the next big conveyance piece that needs to be addressed? And that's going to be it's going to go hand in hand with above 120. And, one of the options that we've talked about is the PTP force main or a little sister park pump station. So those are the two big conveyance pieces that are going to occur, 2030 and beyond. So it's a matter of the timing with those two big pieces. It's going to be one or the other. But whatever happens, we're gonna have to address Klein's Island above 120 when that occurs. And we can't forget that the window that we're dealing with here is through 2035. So so that 2030 to 2035 piece is a tricky piece, but we have to be prepared. We have to be prepared to handle it within this window. So what the options are under consideration above 120 is EQ. Kleinfeld is going to look into stretching the parallel concept. So right now, again, they want to stretch it from 100 to 120. They're going to look to see how much further past 120 he's comfortable going, which they're looking at as we speak. And then the third option we're going to talk about right now is this high rate treatment option. In this particular one, it's called bioactive flow. So those are the three main options that we're considering above 120. So why the pilot and why right now? Again, I just mentioned that the parallel mode, it can be stretched, but we don't know how far it can be stretched. That second block there, that middle second block. There's so many moving parts with the model regarding the final, the final peak flow number that we're going to look at. But the best guesstimate is 160 to 180. Again, that's the 2050 flows during a 5-year storm. So you can see that gap. We may get 150 with a stretch, but then we're stuck with this additional flow above 150. So again, EQ is doable, but I don't know, Chris, EQ just takes up a ton of room, and once you build it, you're stuck with it, aren't you?
Right. And given the nature of the hydrograph that Arcadis is showing, it'll be a wide, so long duration peak event. So to store all that flow and then bleed it back into the main plant will really drive the size of that up large. So in these instances, high rate treatment, being able to turn on, manage that high flow for that period, then turn back off, appears to be a better cost-effective fit.
So I'm sorry, can't these equalization bases, do they have to be built? Does all of it have to be at Klein's Island? Can't some of these be built on the further outskirts of the city?
They could, and that's what we're gonna look at between now and the summer of next year. If for some reason that's a better alternative, then so be it. That's all gonna be looked at with Jim's model. The tricky piece of it is what Chris had mentioned. The long duration of the event, which means that you got to store the volume. Because the hydrograph kind of comes up and it trickles down. So all that, under the area under the curve, so we need stored. So that's why we're not endorsing this technology. We just want to confirm that it works. That's the purpose of this pilot. And we'll get into some more details on the next slide about what's been done so far. It's important to note that this technology is DEP approved, Pennsylvania DEP approved. What's in Newcastle, out by
Cemetery
Pittsburgh,
Authority.
out by Pittsburgh there, it's under construction right now. The item that's interesting for Klein's Island, that it's never been in operation at a trickling filter plant like Klein's Island. So that's why we want to do the pilot, and that's why DEP also wants to see this pilot. I'll have Chris touch on briefly about the bench testing that occurred last year to get proof of concept.
Yes, we simulated, what would be occurring out as a proof of concept in our Conshohocken wastewater lab, and we're able to, we ran a couple tests ourselves. Veolia did another test where they added the second part of bioactive flow, which I know Phil will talk about, but includes some chemical addition, flocculation. So they simulated that as well, all to provide, the level of confidence that, it is viable, with trickling filter slough, that type of biofilms.
So again, with the pilot, we want to confirm that it worked at a trickling filter plant. That's the whole purpose of the pilot. Scope of work, we're gonna get into shortly. AECom is gonna provide the oversight. Veolia will provide the equipment and then an operator. The actual pilot itself is 6 to 8 weeks. We're anticipating April to May of next year. And Chris will have his report by July of next year. And you can see the budget amounts for this authorization. So again, this is the simplifying the AECom proposal. Task 1, 2, and 3, or the first 2 tasks are about the preparation of the pilot. And then the third task would be AECom observing the operation of it and collecting all the samples and running the samples to the labs. Those are the first 3 phases. Second, or the last 3 phases, again, compiling all the results. Changing plans mid-course if we need to, and then preparing the funnel and the drafted funnel reports. So just typical engineering oversight. Again, I mentioned the schedule. It's a 6-week pilot is what the base is, but then we did have the cost does include 2 extra weeks, just as contingency. It's all going to be, Chris, if we don't get the rain to occur, they're gonna have to simulate the rain event. Right. So it's gonna be weather dependent about how long the length of this goes. That's just a typical pilot unit. Chris, I don't know if you want to talk about this. It's real fast.
Yeah, so the bioactive flow is broken into 2 parts. The first step is that contact tank where the biological activity occurs, the BOD reduction. The subsequent step is where chemicals added through a coagulation process, flocculation, and then sand is added as a ballast to help for rapid settlement of TSS and BOD that's attached to that TSS. Then the clarified water leaves and the sand, ballasted sand is collected off the bottom and recirculated through a hydrous cyclone, which knocks off the bacteria, reuses that, and then the sand is reused again through the process. It's closed loop for the sand. But that sand really helps with the small footprint, which is the basis for this high rate process. They're really good in tight spaces, so it fits well on a plan.
So that's a typical layout. So again, why the pilot now if we're talking so far out? There's a couple of reasons. Again, our window for this 537 is through 2035. And assuming we get phase 2 done by the end of this decade, that means we got that 5-year window right there where potentially a conveyance piece will be installed, which is going to force Klein's Island to treat above 120. So we have the momentum to do the pilot now. We did the bench testing. We can't overlook the fact that Arcadis is looking at the screening of alternatives at the same time right now. So we can incorporate, the results of this pilot into the screening of the alternatives. And again, this is not an endorsement of the technology. All we want to know is, will it work at Klein's Island? If it will not work at Klein's Island, then we're just down to 2 options for now. So we want to keep our options open, and the only way to do that is for the pilot. And Veolia is on a tight window here. There's a lot of interest in this pilot. And in order to get in the queue for next year, you know, they want a commitment.
Just to backtrack, remind me again, what is our maximum flow capacity at plant now? How much can flow into that plant? 120?
Right now it's 87, roughly.
No, I meant
Oh,
just total hydraulic capacity.
you can only get 105 with the conveyance system.
So to get the one from 105 to 120, what do we do?
We're gonna do the park pump station force main extension,
Okay.
which is gonna start opening up the system.
And then once we get up to 120, then after that, it's a whole, then we gotta find other solutions
Yes, and
to
then
take us up to.
whatever the number is turned, yeah, we're not ready to share the number yet, but again, it's all tied to the big conveyance piece, which we haven't identified yet. Is it gonna be the PTP force main? Or is it gonna be this little sister park pump station? And when? It's always, it's the when. When is the difficult question to answer. Is it 2030? Is it 2032?
Equalization basins are also gonna be in this for consideration. For
Yes.
ultimate.
Yes, that's all, that's a good base case.
Thanks.
So that's a high level look at phase 1, 2, and 3. And for phase 3, I'm requesting a capital project authorization in the amount of $264,750. That includes 98,000 to Veolia and 141,750 to AECom.
A couple of questions. What is the key technology for this bioactive flow?
The key technology.
I mean, what caused that you can have higher treatment rates?
Yeah, the ballast did at the addition of the sand in the tanks to attach the solids and then rapidly settle that out. So the sand has a lot more density, so it'll settle quicker. So you can take a normal clarification process and really drive it down smaller
So
footprint.
these are special sand that they're surface treated, which is cause the coagulation, or this is the standard sand that they use?
I mean, it has certain specification, but the sand isn't necessarily unique. It's the size gradation of it, things like that, but it's putting it in the package with the flocculant, the chemical, and then the recovery of the sand through the hydrocyclones is the Veolia patent approach.
And right now, they don't have any commercial unit which is operating that one can see the effectiveness of this system, correct?
They have many of that active flow portion, so the ballasted sand approach is very well documented. There are many installations where it's being used on CSO facilities for high rate treatment where they don't have the biological component. The biological piece of it is unique with Pennsylvania where they require non-CSO facilities to meet 65% BOD reduction. So there are fewer installations of bioactive flow where they attach the biological component to the active flow piece. That's the more traditional demonstrated technology.
And you ask the next question, this is because of my lack of understanding of the system that we have. Normally, if somebody, develop a new technology, they have their own pilot units that you can rent, bring it, set it up and see whether you see the rate that you want to see rather than constructing the whole thing from ground zero. They don't have such a thing in here that we can rent, borrow a unit from them and see the effectiveness as a pilot facility.
So they've done that in the lab for us. That was, they offer, but they typically have their bioactive flow unit that they, charge for, piloting. And, as Phil mentioned, there's a lot of interest in it right now. The piece where they're adjusting it for Klein's Island is by adding an additional step because of the trickling filter slough application. So that's a unique, permutation on the bioactive flow process, but
And then we are going to go from a pilot scale to the commercial scale, right? What is that 10x, 2x? I just want to see how scalable it is from pilot to the commercial and have we considered that as part of our pilot testing?
That'll be part of the study that we're looking at, but the pilots, they typically run our 200 gallon per minute type of, on the trailer that Phil showed on the screen. The standard units can come in multiple sizes, but they're very scalable. Like they offer a 10 MGD, a 15, 20, and up to 40 even. And then a 40 that's kind of the higher end of it. So depending on what weather flows needed above the parallel, there'll be some options for, demonstrated, active flow systems at those different increases in size. So they have experience with active flow being scalable. And the biological piece is a pretty straightforward. It's just using the trickling filter sloughes.
An overall cost in the commercial scale versus equalization tank, is it, half, a third?
We're showing pretty significant savings earlier to the tune of greater than $20 million in savings over equalization, just because the equalization has a lot of earthwork, concrete, subsurface, where these are much smaller and the equipment, is relatively, cost effective. You have smaller hydrocyclones, some recirculation pumps, things like that. But they're, especially the bigger you get, the cost savings become even more pronounced.
Okay, thank you.
The $20 million savings, is that, how's that calculated? Does that include construction costs? Spread out over the life of the equalization tanks and this project? Or does it include operation and maintenance spread out over the lifetime of them? What's the 20 million represent?
That was more just a capital, the initial screening. It was a capital comparison. Since these are run relatively infrequently, just these big wet weather events, the operational side is a little less influential as it would be in a 24/7 facility.
Right.
But just, the scale of the earthwork and concrete that's required for the large equalization facilities were significantly more expensive.
And you're confident that if this pilot proves successful at this low flow rate that you're testing it at, it's definitely transferable to the much larger flows that we would have to deal with.
Yes, that's what we've seen before, where we've piloted the process and then seen it installed.
I would just add that there's issues with the storage. So, with the storage tank, once it's filled, you're done. If you get back-to-back storms, then you have overflows. If you can't fill that tank fast enough because the storm intensity is so great, you still have overflows. So I think just the basic concept of looking at some other treatment where you're processing the water through and not holding it is definitely the way to go. Just in my humble opinion.
I hope your opinion is too humble.
One more question, I think, again, this is from my lack of understanding. Can we skip the phase 2 and scale up the phase 3 to higher rates? So we only have, so our phase 2 and 3 would be combined. Does that make sense or it doesn't make sense?
You could, that would be probably some of those screening of alternatives, we'll be doing the piloting. You'll still have to extend the force main, things like that. So there'll be costs associated with that. But yes, at some point, does it make sense to do parallel or just go straight to a high rate system? And I think that would be an economic analysis that we would do.
We can't lose sight of the fact that, the operation of a unit like this may be challenging at first. So there's a lot to go into the decision. And again, we're not even there yet. We're just trying to see, is this even viable? And there's a lot to discuss after we confirm the viability.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board or the public on this proposal to do this pilot study? If not, can I have a motion to approve the capital authorization and also the professional services authorization, put it all together in one motion? So a motion, a second?
Second.
Second from Linda. Any discussion on this motion? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes carry.
Vice Chairman.
Excuse me?
I just wanted to highlight, during the presentation, Brian Noggle and, Ted Lyons made a joint meeting. So we have all 9 board members present now.
Thank you.
Hi, guys.
Brian, you want to take over?
No, go right ahead.
You're
doing a great job.
That's fine, I'm just giving you. I just have one question.
Yeah.
So just when you were talking about, Phil, when you're saying when, just a question maybe for you and for Ed from, big picture, 537 as far as like planning and the capital, not seeing a list of bonds or other debt service. I mean, is there a way that you can lessen the pain that, there might be some bonds that are current now that are paid off and in the future? Because we're talking about 2030, 2040. Are there some things that might be done and then new and, that could be taken on? I assume you're looking at that as part of the 537 plan. If maybe you could push that out so that, it's, that happens. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's not feasible, but when you just said when a couple of times, it just made me think that it'd be worth mentioning that.
Yeah, at least I'll chime in here.
So.
Yeah, the short answer is yes, we're looking at that. But I guess I wanted to highlight that at most likely our next meeting, we're also going to be starting to talk about the financial and institutional evaluation related to the 537. So it's not just about where LCA is coming up with the money, but also how the costs are shared with all the signatories and what the rate impact is. So that's going to be a separate parallel set of projects and work that we're going to do in parallel with the 537 engineering side of it. So we're going to have those answers before we submit the 537. This phase 1 work we'll have to incorporate into our capital budgeting, capital funding program. But yeah, it's a big question.
Right.
We don't have all the answers right now. You want to add anything, Ed?
No, I think it is a big question. I think some of it is going to be really dependent on what the partnership arrangements are going to be, because that's going to tell us what we have to fund ourselves, what we have to go on the outside for. The timing is going to be important because, to be honest with you, at this very moment, economic conditions are not exactly right. So you're going to have to factor in some evaluation of what's going to happen to that over time, depending on when these are, slated to go in ground and et cetera. So there's a lot of variables right now. And I think that will play out over time, but we're chartered with having to come up with some of them answers kind of quickly. So we will.
Okay, well, if there's nothing more, thank you for that presentation. Let's go on to the next item of business now is in our suburban division. We're going to have to do some more manhole rehabilitation. They help us to do spend more money doing that.
That's a good way of putting it, Scott. This project is on your goldenrod sheets in the printed packet and pages 59 through 63 on the digital version. And Chuck, take it away.
Thanks, Lisa. I also have Jason Peters on the line. He's home babysitting at a construction project, so try not to have him talk too much because there'll probably be a lot of noise in the background. But this is the 3rd annual rehab project for manholes along the Western Lehigh Interceptor that Capital Works is managing. And what these projects have been involving is basically inflow, stopping inflow by raising manholes from at grade to above floodplain elevation to the extent possible, and repairing concrete, broken concrete parging, broken concrete around the frames of these manholes, fixing displaced covers that because of the floodwater, debris, current, whatever, it pushes these covers and they get displaced either partially off or sometimes it's totally off the manhole, and putting new watertight, bolt down watertight frames and covers on. Capital Works inspected these manholes. To date, in the last couple of years, we inspected about 480 manholes, so about 3/4 of the manholes in our Western Lehigh Interceptor have been inspected within the last couple of years by Keystone Consulting Engineers and Capital Works. And we cobbled together projects based on priority. And this is the third annual project. Like I said, it involves 62 manholes. So 62 manholes are going to get rehabbed. They're going to get raised or watertight bolt down covers replaced and concrete repaired. So we advertised this project for bid. We received 6 bidders, very good competitive bidding. The lowest bidder is Sherman Excavating at $157,475. We've worked with Sherman numerous times before. They did one of these prior projects and they performed well. And we think their price is very reasonable, given the difficulty in accessing some of these manholes. And during construction, we propose to have Keystone Consulting Engineers do construction inspection, part-time inspection and verification of quantities and verification that the work is done according to our specifications. So I'm asking the board for a capital project authorization in the amount of $197,975. And that's consisting of $157,475 for Sherman Excavating, $22,500 for Keystone Consulting Engineers, and then there's some numbers in there for staff and contingency. Does anybody have any questions on this project?
Yeah, I'm just curious, Chuck, of the 62 manholes we're gonna work on, how many of those had already had remedial work done on them and they have been subsequently damaged and need to be repaired again?
I don't have that number. Maybe Jason has that number. But they sometimes don't last too long with floodwater debris coming down and damaging them. I mean, we do the best we can, but I can't tell you like how long they will last. The bolt down cover should last forever, but you can't do anything about floodwater debris that comes up and hangs up around these manholes. But I don't think any of them were done recently, Scott, because when we started this project, we started way upstream by the pretreatment plant, and we've been working downstream. So we didn't touch any of these in recent years.
Oh, okay, well, that's good.
Yeah. Oh, Jason, would you like to add something regarding that?
Yeah, sure. To briefly talk in regards to condition assessment, external condition assessment of the manholes and the longevity of our walkovers that we've done over the last several years now, verifying external condition assessment. We do end up finding out that a lot of these structures do get to see, just like you said, Scott, where the flood waters and debris are actually the real cause and root of the problem to these manholes being so close to the stream in proximity. Those structures themselves, the way they were built back, let's call it 40, 50 years ago now, they're cast iron frames and covers, not bolted down frames to the structure, in some areas not bolted lid to the frame. So it doesn't take too much. Over time, a couple of years, the parging may fall off, or you get a flood come through and the parging comes off, and allows an area for that frost, thaw and frost to occur, and unsettles that frame from the cover, and then you get another flood and it comes off. So even with our walkovers, consecutive walkovers over the years, where you get to see you walk past it 3 years ago and it was fine, and we go walk past it again 3 years later, now it has some external condition problems. So the way Keystone Consulting Engineers and Capital Works have come up with a conclusion on this is we're actually tied the rim elevations of these manholes to an actual USGS creek stream elevation gauge, as well as the creek elevation gauges that John Parsons put in a few years back. So we can actually see which manholes get affected by these creek risings during the flooding event, And that's one of the prioritization levels that we're looking at when we're scoping out these projects. So with the new frames and covers we're putting on, they're actually a composite frame and cover. And the frame is actually bolted to the structure and gasketed, and the actual lid is bolted to the frame itself as well. So it should weather the storm of the rising waters a heck of a lot better than what's out there today.
Thank you, Jason.
You're very welcome.
Any questions on this proposal?
Just one comment, Scott. Looking at table 1, the bid results. Firstly, congratulations on getting so many bids. That's pretty much of an accomplishment in the current climate. But quite a wide range there. I was wondering if there was any comment on the wide range of bids.
I can add some insight into that, Kevin, if you'd like. Some of those bidders that are on there, there's a very wide discrepancy, I should say, in the types of work that they do typically. Some of these companies are generalized site, some are piping companies, and some are actual companies that this is all they do is manhole rehab work. Sherman Excavating actually a site contractor, but they know the routine that they do this. They've done this kind of work for us in the past. They know our system pretty darn well, and that's where I believe they came in with a really good number on the proposed work here.
Okay, thanks.
You're very welcome.
So Jason, you feel confident with Sherman? I mean, Sherman does a lot of construction work, but they're capable when it comes to manholes.
Absolutely, Scott. Last year they performed this same job. They did, I want to say roughly 56. Their means and methods on how to get out there and do the work is, in my opinion, very spot on. Very little disturbance. They actually do a lot of handwork to get the material out on the job site, the frames and covers, and to remove the existing frames and covers, they're actually using a little side-by-side UTV, because a lot of these areas that are in through the woods, you can't bring heavy equipment in, or if you do, it creates a heck of a lot more construction costs to get into those areas. So their methodology to get back to do the work is spot on, and that's why their cost is what it is. And they do a wonderful job.
Sounds good. Thank you, Jason.
You're welcome, Scott.
Okay, can I have a motion to authorize this project?
Second.
You are. That goes legal. Any questions on the motion? If not, all in favor, vote aye.
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 Any opposed? Ayes carried. Thank you very much. Thank you. Next topic, Allentown Division. Pines Island wastewater treatment plant, substation number 1 and switchgear replacement. Approval.
Again, just for the folks following along, these are the green pages, and on the digital package, it's pages 64 through 68. Chuck.
Thanks, Liesl. Brian Geisel is here. Brian is an engineer with Capital Works. He's a project manager on this project, and he's going to fill in some of the details here for me. So this project, this is for design phase of a replacement project to replace the switchgear and substation number 1 down at Klein's Island. Substation number 2 was replaced in 2019. The replacement of substation number 1 and the switchgear was deferred because of funding issues that we had at the time. Those issues have since been resolved, and we're moving forward with the replacement of the switchgear and substation number 1. The reason for the replacement, that there were several studies done during the past 10 years. All the studies, they were condition assessments, they were electrical in nature, and they all pointed to the need to replace the switchgear and the substation, both of which are about 45 years old and determined to be at the end of their service life. Klein's Island, as I wrote there in the first paragraph, it's provided power from 2 12.4 kV feeds that come into the switchgear, then they go to the substations which feed the various MCCs throughout the plant. Right now, there's no automatic transfer when one of those feeds, if one of those feeds should go down. That's something we want to incorporate in our design, to have an automatic transfer to transfer over to the other feed in event of a PPL issue. And so we did replace substation number 2 in 2019. Keystone Consulting Engineers was the design engineer. They also did a condition assessment prior to that design, and they were involved during construction phase as well. Keystone Consulting Engineers did a fine job for us. The job finished roughly on time and on budget. And we'd like to use them again, given their familiarity with the Kleins Island plant and the electrical system out there. In the recommended alternative, I go into what's going to be what we propose to upgrade as far as this project. So it's the new switchgear to be constructed just south of the existing switchgear. That will enable the existing switchgear to remain in service while we're constructing the replacement. And then the substation, replacing the substation there as well. And so the authorization I'm looking for is design authorization. Keystone Consulting Engineers did do the preliminary engineering. That was submitted to the city for major capital approval, and the city approved that in late October. So we'd like to keep moving forward with design. Optimally, my goal is to have this project constructed just prior to the mobilization of contractors for the 100 MGD projects, in order to contain the number of contractors on the site at any one time. So I'm really pushing to put this design on a fast track and be able to bid it this spring, so that, and what Linda pointed out earlier about the lead time for equipment, to allow us enough lead time to get this project constructed by the end of 2025.
Chuck, this is Keystone is different than the other Keystone.
Yeah,
The Keystone Engineering Group.
Keystone Engineering, they're from Mount Vernon, Paoli area.
Not,
Yeah,
not the manhole.
Yeah, thanks for that distinction.
You were saying Keystone Consulting.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah,
It's very good.
I had KCE, but no, it's Keystone Engineering.
Thank you, Chuck.
Sure, so I'm asking for a capital project authorization of $181,275. $151,275 of that is the design fee, design and bid phase for Keystone Engineering.
Okay, board, we've heard Chuck's presentation. Any questions on that? Can I have a motion to approve Chuck's request? This capital project authorization and professional services authorization. Bring it all together in one motion.
So moved.
We have a motion,
Second.
second by Linda. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes carry. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next order of business. Monthly project updates. See, that's first.
Yep.
First board member, first board meeting.
All right, so this is the last item in the packet, pages 69 to 75, if you're following along online. So a couple things going on with the report. First of all, my apologies, there's a couple things missing from the report. We have a number of items, if you look through it, that are listed for the December 12th meeting. And that is on purpose, because we actually don't have anything that's on the agenda for action for the 28th of November. So we're most likely going to cancel that meeting unless anything pops up. But we wanted to give you a highlight of some of the things that are coming up in December. Missing from that for December are two, I think, relatively important things. Number one is what I mentioned earlier about the Act 537 financial and institutional evaluation. We do have a proposal from actually 3 consultants to do that work, and we'll be kind of packaging that together for some conversation and authorization in December. Another really time-sensitive one in December, we will likely be coming to you asking for a resolution to apply for some grant funding through the H2O PA program. The grant deadline is in December, so if we're going to pursue that grant opportunity, we'll need the resolution passed in December. We won't have our details together in time for November, so December will be enough for that. Looking ahead, I think there's the rest of the report is relatively self-explanatory. As I said, a number of items coming up for the December meeting. The monthly finance report and monthly operations report will just send out and post if there is no meeting, so that usually works out okay. I don't know if there's any questions on the information items or anything else.
Yeah, I've noticed since we went to this new format, but we're not getting any module reviews. You start listening.
So the monthly financial report, we modified, so the last page of the monthly financial report includes the investment activity as well as the development activity. So that's where it's shown now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if you go back and look at last few months of financial reports, that's the last page of the financial report.
Okay, thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, first.
Next item, our systems up. Oh, that's it. Are we gonna do that today or?
Nope,
Okay.
that'll just be sent out to you for the end of the month.
Okay, staff comments.
I have nothing additional to say.
Solicitor,
No comments.
anything from the public?
No, thank you.
No, thank you.
Board member comments? I would have a comment. I wanted to, I talked to Ed about this. Is there a it has to do with our financial reports that we get monthly from Ed, which seem to be they're very detailed. But sometimes I think they're for my purposes, they're too detailed. And I would think maybe in the interest of time, is it possible that some of the board would be agreeable to maybe having Ed make his monthly financial reports more succinct and shorter? I just find that the reports, at least to me sometimes, I just find it's just so chock full of information that I find it hard to figure out what's the basic information that I need to know. I'm wondering how the board feels about possibly wanting to ask Ed to make his reports more concise and shorter in time.
Scott, this is Brian. We can discuss that at a different time when we're all together, maybe retreating. I think that's one of the topics.
Okay, well, thank you, Brian. Okay, if there's nothing else, are we going to be coming back from executive session?
Yeah, there's a separate link sent out for those who are joining by Zoom for an executive session. After we adjourn, you can just set a time for when we want everyone to reconvene.
Okay, well, I'd like to end this meeting right now. Let's see. What do you think? 10 minutes from now? 1 minute?
10:15, 1:15.
1:15, that's 7 minutes from now.
Okay, 1:15, we're going to reconvene in executive session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.